Hello and welcome to Coup Save America. Today we lay bare the ugly truth. Capitalism is a parasitic system, not a liberating engine. By design, it feeds off the many to enrich the few. In fact, as Oxfam reports, the richest 1% grab nearly two-thirds of all new wealth created in recent years. That monstrous imbalance isn't a bug, it's a feature. Historical socialists Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels taught that in capitalism, the worker produces all value, while capitalists pocket the surplus. And today's data proves it. US Fed researchers found that the bottom 50% of Americans have seen virtually no net wealth growth since 1989, while the top 1% have tripled theirs. In other words, everyday people work harder and harder just to stand still, while the billionaires buy their third yacht. This isn't a democracy, it's a corporate oligarchy. Capitalism is a system built on exploitation. As we know, a parasite cannot survive without a host, and capitalism's host is the working class. It thrives by sucking value out of workers and communities. Consider how labor itself is exploited. Workers create the goods, services, and wealth, but get back only a bare subsistence, while executives and shareholders skim the rest. The data is brutal. Even as US productivity and corporate profits soar in recent decades, real wages for American workers have barely budged since the 1970s. Today's typical worker has about the same purchasing power he did back in 1979. In contrast, CEO salaries and financial gains explode. In 2021, CEOs made over 300 times their workers' pay. No surprise then that, after the 2008 crash and the latest recovery, 95% of the gains went to the top 1%. The rest of us got crumbs. And that's if we were lucky. Capitalism accomplishes this through several cruel tricks. It profiteers from scarcity and need, turning basic human rights into profit centers. We see this with housing, healthcare, education, even water becomes a commodity. Under capitalism, these essentials are made artificially scarce or overpriced so that a select few can sell them for a premium. For example, and we've talked about this many times on the show, the US spends far more per person on healthcare than any other country, yet we lag behind in outcomes because the system is set up to line insurers and hospital executives' pocket, not keep people healthy. Likewise, education and housing are treated as markets, so millions are forced into debt or eviction while landlords and lenders count their dividends. Capitalism commodifies everything. No part of life is off limits when there's money to be made. Public lands are leased to oil companies. Water and the air are privatized or polluted for profit. Even our personal data is harvested and sold to the highest bidder. Intellectual commons, seeds, software, knowledge, they're either locked behind patents or paywalls so that the billionaires can monopolize the gains. Philosopher Naomi Klein warns that unfettered corporate power poses a grave threat to the habitability of the planet. In the chase for profit, capitalism destroys the environment. Institutionalized nations, which make up only around 14% of the global population, have burned about 80% of all carbon emissions since 1850. They enjoy cheap fossil-fueled growth, while the bill comes due in global warming, extreme weather, and extinct species. And who pays the price? Well, the poorest countries, of course, and future generations. As one recent analysis shows, rich countries have effectively drained some $2.2 trillion per year from poorer ones through unequal trade, debt, and resource siphoning, a hidden transfer of value that is accelerated under neoliberalism. Over the post-1960 era, that adds up to about $62 trillion that has been stolen from the global south. That is enough to have ended world poverty 15 times over. In short, wherever capitalism generates wealth in one part of the world, it steals it from another, leaving exploitation and poverty in its wake. As economist E.A.G. Robinson observed in 1941, the greatest merit of the capitalist system is that it succeeds in using the nastiest motives of nasty people for the ultimate benefit of society. That is, the system's merit in practice It means the many pay while the few reap all the reward. It's no surprise to many viewers of this show that capitalism also concentrates power. It inevitably breeds an oligarchy of the super rich. As the data shows, wealth does not trickle down, it funnels upward. Today in the United States, a few names epitomize this. There's Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, and their peers individually hold wealth on the order of trillions. And together, a couple of hundred billionaires possesses more wealth than the bottom half of all Americans combined. Put another way, less than 1,000 US billionaires have more wealth than the 165 million poorest Americans. That is the scale of inequality. Few build a fortune by enslaving the dreams of the many. And of course, along with a large amount of accumulated wealth comes extraordinary political power. Corporate lobbying and big money buy laws and subsidies. Elections are effectively for sale as politicians of both parties dance to the tune of their billionaire donors. One need only recall how quickly Congress rubber-stamped huge corporate bailouts or deregulation when their paymasters called out for their help. Media power is likewise centralized. 6 gigantic corporations now own roughly 90% of US media. These 6 wield decision power over nearly everything we see, hear, and read. What chance does a grassroots movement have when it can be blacklisted by a handful of CEOs? Noam Chomsky calls this manufacturing consent. Powerful owners shape the narrative so that the ills of capitalism are presented as just the way things are, and any real dissent is marginalized. This is not democracy in action, it's plutocracy. Decisions that affect millions, ranging from war and peace, healthcare policy, education funding, are made not by voters, but in boardrooms and back rooms. As the political economist Jeff Fox once showed, on major policy issues, US elites and business groups sway outcomes far more than ordinary citizens. And we see the results constantly. Tax cuts for the rich during deficit crises, gutted regulations on Wall Street after each crash, austerity for schools and hospitals, while weapons contractors get trillions. When the system funnels money up, politics follows it up. Politicians at best offer token reforms to placate the masses, but the machine keeps running in the interests of the 0.01%. Capitalism's defenders will tell you it's the engine of innovation and freedom, that hard work and talent are all you need to succeed. Yet those are myths to justify inequality. The so-called American dream is mostly, well, propaganda. It fetishizes individual entrepreneurs while ignoring the majority who toil endlessly for crumbs. In reality, most people are trapped in cycles of debt and precarity. Despite record corporate profits in recent years, real wages for most workers have stagnated. And even a good raise is often eaten up by rising rent or healthcare costs. Meanwhile, student debt, medical bills, and predatory lending chain entire generations. Capitalism loves to show the self-made billionaire as proof that the system is fair, that it works. But for each one of these success stories, there are millions more invisible workers who made it possible through their labor and yet got nothing but the privilege of just surviving. And most are barely surviving at that. As a Pew study notes, after inflation, the typical worker's pay today is about the same as it was 40 to 45 years ago. The progress of productivity and technology has gone straight to CEO bonuses and shareholder dividends, not to the nurses, teachers, or factory workers that we all depend upon. Even the solutions offered by the system are sleight of hand. They point to occasional new social programs or corporate charity, maybe funding a museum wing here or a green initiative there, as if capitalism cares about people. But these are distractions. Climate change itself, for example, is often turned into profit opportunities. As Naomi Klein warns, the crises that threaten us are frequently used to hand over yet more resources to the 1%. Polluters get paid and disaster capitalists get richer, while vulnerable communities suffer. Likewise, corporate-sponsored green projects or meager wage hikes are trotted out as evidence that the system can reform itself. Yet they never touch the root. Banks and giants keep doing business as usual. In short, the freedom capitalism provides is an illusion. It doesn't exist. It says hard work and you can work hard and you can be rich. Yet it systematically makes more people slaves of jobs they loathe, desperate to make ends meet. It parrots democracy while entangling politics and corporate strings. It claims to lift society up, but in practice, it digs trenches between classes. Any socialist or sociologist will tell you that humans evolved as cooperative creatures, not as autonomized competitors. So what happens when our cooperative nature comes up against capitalist alienation? Anthropologists describe prehistoric hunter-gatherer bands as largely egalitarian gift economies. In those societies, every member shared resources in accordance with individual needs and had no concept of capital accumulation. We lived for hundreds of thousands of years in communities where cooperation and not cutthroat competition was the norm. Frederick Engels noted that capitalism often preys on these old communal systems. For example, colonial powers in Java, India, and beyond imposed profit-driven agriculture on formerly communal villages. He warns that this old communistic social order became the finest and broadest basis of exploitation. Agriculture and then markets shattered the harmony of hunter-gatherer societies. Private property, the division of labor, and capitalist production chains turned neighbors into competitors and even enemies. Workers became cogs in machines, alienated from the products of their labor and, most importantly, each other. Sociologists from Mark to Durkheim note that capitalism erodes social bonds. It breeds loneliness, anxiety, and a sense that life is just struggle. But it didn't have to be this way. Our species is built for mutual aid. Every major discovery in science, art, or culture has come from collaboration. Capitalism forces cooperation into commodity relations, replacing generosity with price tags. So when defenders claim that human nature is greedy or that capitalism rewards merit, they ignore the deep history. What we see in billionaires is often not merit, but the result of inherited wealth, monopolies, and privilege. Noam Chomsky astutely notes that the elite's version of individualism is about taking, not contributing. In contrast, grassroots movements around the world, from community gardens to solidarity networks, reflect our real instincts to share and support each other. Under capitalism, we have manufactured an illusion of choice. We're told every time that we shop or work that we have so-called choices, dozens of brands, dozens of jobs. But again, this choice is mostly superficial. Sure, you choose between Coke or Pepsi, Uber or Lyft, but all those companies share the same venture capital owners. You pick a career, but it has to fit into the gig economy or corporate hierarchy. The system sells individual success stories like the garage startup to tech billionaire narrative to justify the whole rigged game. They highlight the 1% and blame the 99%, such as immigrants, minorities, and of course, the lazy poor. It's a classic divide and conquer. By turning us on each other, capitalism hides the real villain, and that is the system itself. The American dream of home ownership, upward mobility, and a comfortable retirement is a mirage for most Americans. And yes, there have been periods such as post-World War II when wages rose broadly, but that was the exception. And these achievements were fueled by strong unions and even tax rates above 90% on the richest. Once those brakes were taken off in the 1980s, inequality zoomed. Today, the college degree that was once a path to stability often means debt pennage. Parents work 2 or 3 jobs just to keep up. None of this is lift all boats. In fact, as Oxfam put it bluntly, a rising tide no longer lifts all ships, just the super yachts. None of this means people have failed by being too soft or lazy. It means that the system is quite literally killing us. We deserve a better world because deep down we know the parasite must be cut out. The question, of course, is how. None of capitalism's tweaks have ever fixed its core. We cannot regulate our way out of a system designed to exploit. We need structural change and mass movements. History shows that unions, socialist parties, and mass uprisings such as the Paris Commune, the Soviet and Chinese revolutions, and the New Deal labor movement have been the real force pushing for real democracy. Concretely, the path forward must include 5 key actions. First, we must democratize the economy. Workers should have a real stake and say in production. We need to expand worker cooperatives and public banks that fund local community projects. Michael Albert's participatory economics in real-world examples like Spain's Mondragon and Italy's Emilia-Romagna co-ops prove people can run industry and agriculture more equitably when profit is not the sole goal. Put more power in labor's hands by strengthening unions, reinstated collective bargaining, and enacting workplace democracy. Next, the public should claim ownership of life essentials. Treat healthcare, education, housing, energy, and transportation as rights, not commodities. This means either universal social programs or full public ownership, where we elect their boards instead of filling corporate coffers. The COVID-19 pandemic showed how precarious privatized healthcare is. Rich countries with universal healthcare fared better on average. Imagine a world where nobody is homeless because housing is guaranteed, or where no family goes bankrupt for medical bills because medicine is free at point of service. This is possible when profit isn't in charge of people's lives. Third, we must break up monopolies. Big tech, big pharma, big oil, Wall Street banks, none of these are competitive markets. Enforce antitrust laws aggressively. Smaller companies mean more opportunities for entrepreneurs and more resilience in our economy. We need to decentralize wealth by capping how much income or inheritance one person can have with a modest wealth tax and by cracking down on offshore tax havens. We've seen in pandemics and crashes that too big to fail banks get bailed out at public expense. Smaller banks break more easily but pose less systemic risk. Most importantly, we must end corporate control of our politics. Money should be taken out of elections entirely. We should ban all corporate and billionaire campaign donations and publicly fund all campaigns instead. We should require strict transparency for lobbying and bolster anti-corruption enforcement. John Nichols and Robert McChesney show in their book, Dollarocracy, how media could be democratized. We could likewise enforce public interest mandates for broadcasters and social media platforms. Amendments at both state and national levels must make clear that under our Constitution, that money is not in fact speech, and people's votes cannot be drowned by billionaires. And finally, we must shift away from infinite growth. The capitalist imperative is perpetual expansion of production and consumption. This is ecologically impossible and socially destructive. We must adopt degrowth or steady state principles in rich countries, prioritize well-being, health, education, leisure, and the environment over GDP growth. We must implement a Green New Deal or similar socialist green framework that creates high-quality jobs through renewable energy, sustainable infrastructure, and conservation. Democratically planned, not just left to market whims. We must also cap carbon emissions, ban new fossil fuel projects, and fund a global climate reparations program to help vulnerable nations adapt. In other words, rebuild democracy to include economic democracy. Let the people, not CEOs, decide what society produces and how. This is not hand-wringing. In times of war crisis, governments have mobilized economies, and we can certainly do it for peace, justice, and climate. It's about political will and popular pressure. History's great progressive movements have combined moral outrage with concrete demands and have won victories. To be blunt, capitalism must fall for democracy to rise. So long as capitalism remains our dominant system, true democracy will remain an illusion. As Marx and Engels taught, the ruling class always controls the state to its own ends. The billionaire class, Wall Street, and corporate elites did not emerge by accident. They are capitalism's offspring. And under their rule, our rights and resources are hostage to profit. We cannot vote our way out of class rule if our parties and institutions are owned by capital. In the end, we face a relatively stark choice. We can continue down this road of extraction, austerity, and ecological collapse, or we can break the chains of the old order. We must demand what the capitalist parties never will, that humans and nature come before shareholder value. As Owen Jones summarizes from the manifesto of every socialist, we must build a global movement to reclaim the political, economic, and ecological commons. Revolutionary? Yes. We're fighting for a revolution of democracy, equality, and solidarity. The hope is not in waiting for another billionaire to save us. It's in us, workers, students, families, communities, all organizing together. You have nothing to lose but your chains of debt, paycheck to paycheck survival, and second class status. We know that free people cooperating instead of competing could create an abundance far beyond what capitalism could ever promise. We can run an economy where doctors don't hesitate to treat, teachers to teach, and farmers to feed people without worrying about profit margins. It's not a pipe dream, it's humanity's greatest potential, suppressed by the greed in our systems. Friends, the time for half measures is over. Every reform within the capitalist framework has been watered down or reversed. What we need is systemic change, a new society based on cooperation, justice, and sustainability. The question is not whether capitalism will finally collapse under its own contradictions, as history suggests that it will, but whether we can build something better in its place. Revolutionary change is on the horizon, and its engine is the collective struggle of all of us. Friends, fellow workers, let's get to work on that revolution. Our democracy literally depends upon it. And that, my friends, is the final word up front. I'm Sean Sainhart, and this is Coup Save America. Coming up, we will learn how our current political situation reflects both the ego and development of capitalism with our guest, Beth Green, who is an author, counselor, musician, and spiritual activist. And Beth will be joining us right after the break. We'll be right back. Friends, Beth Green is an intuitively guided counselor, teacher, spiritual activist, composer, and workshop leader, an original thinker, and a real catalyst for change. She's been a blogger for the San Diego News Network and the Huffington Post, and now hosts 2 live streams a week on Facebook and YouTube. She has written 6 books on the human condition, led hundreds of workshops to help people see themselves and the world more clearly, and started a movement called The Stream. And if all that is not enough, at age 76, Beth launched a new career as an improvisational, that was a big word there, pianist. And of course, Beth is joining us right now to share her story of overcoming chronic illness to pursue her lifelong goals of making our world a better place. Beth, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's very rare that I agree with everything that the host says. It's a pleasure. It's like I'm sitting there saying, is he reading my mind or what? Just a couple of things that I would add to it, but I totally agree with you. And I have felt like this since I was a child.
Right. Well, you have overcame a lot as a child. I was wondering if you could kind of start there and sort of speak to the health obstacles that you overcame and how that kind of, I mean, I know that you have a love for playing the piano. Yes. I know that your early health problems kind of put a halt to that. So, yeah, if you could kind of share your story a little bit, that would be great.
Well, I don't know why, but I was born with a certain consciousness that makes no sense. It wasn't in my family. It was just in me. When I was 5 years old, I was very keenly aware of the suffering that was caused by the capitalist society, and was talking to adults about racism and prejudice and all of that. And I don't know where it came from, but I also was born with a hereditary condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. But so I was physically weak, but my brain was all over the place. You know, my body didn't do much. It's still the same way after all these years. I'm 80 years old. Somehow I've survived.
Well, you look great, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, I would never guess that you're 80.
Really? Well, it's probably because I don't wear makeup and I don't dye my hair and I don't do all of those things that destroy our bodies for our appearance. I think that
Yeah.
makes a difference. So tell me if I'm telling you too much. When I was 9 years old, they added Under God to the Pledge of Allegiance. And I was horrified. And it didn't mean that I wasn't spiritual in my own way. It was that I knew that was wrong. That's our Constitution. And so I stood up for that, and they threatened to expel me from elementary school. And at that time, Senator Joseph McCarthy was on television. We had the
Yeah.
Army McCarthy hearings. And I looked at this guy. I saw what happened with the Pledge of Allegiance. And there were a number of other things that happened at that very time in 1954. And I said, whatever he's against, I'm for. And I'm serious. So then I read this book about the Spanish Civil War by Upton Sinclair, I believe it was. And I said, I'm with them. And I became a socialist. And it was just like that. And it was so obvious to me, that it was just so, and it seems to me to be obvious to everybody. In fact, if I may add something really personal, when I was a little girl, probably 5, 6, my father would take me to work. I grew up in a Jewish working class family. We did not have much money. The usual. My grandparents were immigrants. My parents struggled through the Depression, and we just came out of the Holocaust, which was, a horrendous thing that I think you just pick up, how awful fascism is and how bad the society can be. But when I was really little, I saw my father, who was a salesman, and he would go from hardware store to hardware store carrying boxes of what we call tchotchkes, which are the little things that he was trying to sell. And people treated him very badly. The buyers treated him badly. The owners, they had a little bit of power. In fact, they were nobody either.
Right.
But this is what you're talking about, how we divide and conquer. Now, I love what you said about competition. And so they were trying to empower themselves and make themselves feel good by putting my father down. I think I saw this was like deep in my heart, that I understood the relationship between the emotional and the social and the economic and the political, that we are all manipulated emotionally into thinking that this is what's going to give us what we need. So at 9 years old, I announced that I was a socialist. And of course, during the McCarthy period, that was not a good thing. And I continued fighting the capitalism communist conversation. When I was 12 years old, I was reported to the FBI, according to some people who heard me. I don't know if that's true. I know eventually I had an FBI file, as did everybody who was in the movement. And
I'm sure I have one, so.
I would hope so. And when I was 16, I wrote a letter. I became chronically ill at 15, really bad. I had rheumatic fever, which at that time was a killer, on top of everything else that was wrong with me. And I was in bed or a chair for a year and a half.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry.
And I was told that if I moved, I would die. Nevertheless, I saw what was happening with nuclear proliferation, and I wrote a letter to the New York Times that changed my life. Never thought they were going to publish it, but I wrote it from the perspective of a 16-year-old girl watching her world going towards destruction. We could say that today. I mean, I feel like it's all deja vu. And I don't know if you heard, Sean, but the big, beautiful bill passed the Senate. Disgusting. I mean, just like how people can live with no conscience is kind of hard to understand. But, I guess they haven't seen The Wizard of Oz, that everybody has a brain and everybody has courage and we should all use it. But anyway, this letter that I wrote, I didn't tell my parents. I went to the mailbox down the street, and I thought I was going to. I was told I would die if I walked. I was only allowed to go to the bathroom. That was my life for a year and a half. And I didn't tell anybody. Well, I went off to college. I got a scholarship to Smith College. Smith College was an Ivy League school. And don't ask me how, because at that time, I was really ill, but I got the highest grades on the English SATs in my school's history. And so, I got in. And it was the biggest mistake, but it was also a learning experience that I ever made, because 2 days after I got there, they were trying to expel me. They they were focusing on, how do you cut lemon? And I was talking about revolution and socialism and the working class and all of that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't a good fit. But they did find out about this letter because it was published all over the world. It was put on the cover of a Pete Seeger album, and it was on the radio and all of that. So somebody got wind of this letter. And as a result of that, I got expelled. Well, I will tell you, I was contacted by some students on the East Coast who said they were going to have a hunger march around the White House. This was like, what, 1960, 1961? I have no memory, never have. And they came and they said, do you want to come with us to march against nuclear proliferation? And I said, sure. I didn't know anything. I was like, I'd never met anybody who thought the way I did, ever.
Right.
And so I said, sure, I'll go. And I went into the school and I said, I have to cut this class, which was on what they called a calendar day. A calendar day is a day you weren't supposed to cut a class because it was the day before Thanksgiving. It was a Thanksgiving hunger march, right? And so, being the honorable person that I was, I informed them that I was going to have to miss a class, but that it was for a good reason. And they said to me, they would teach me a lesson I would never forget, and that I would be punished.
Wow.
And mind you, I'm all alone. I have no friends. Nobody wanted to talk to me in that school. They thought, oh my God, who is this crazy lady talking about these things, And they were, so many of them, they had their cashmere sweaters they were flinging around the floor. I discovered there really was a ruling class. It wasn't just a story. I was there. I was with the girls, and we were all being trained to marry guys from Princeton. Jewish girls did not count. They were very, very anti-Semitic in that school. Very, I could tell you about it, but there's too much to tell you. But anyway, as a result of that, they put me on probation. And it was a probation that I could not do anything about. It said I could not cut any classes. And I just came out of bed after a year and a half. And you tell me that that wasn't designed to screw me up, because there were other things. I couldn't carry trays. They said, if you can't carry trays in your house, then you'll have to leave the school. I mean, it was one thing after another. Eventually, they managed to expel me for that reason. And they told me that I had to leave the school that day. Wow. This is Massachusetts. My parents, poor working class loves, are working in New York City, right? I said, I couldn't. I said, you have to let me stay one day. And so I called my parents. They were crushed. I mean, like so many Eastern European Jews, it was their dream that their children would go on and get an education. And they were crushed. But they came to pick me up, and the school told them very, very clearly they were going to make sure I could never get into another college. I was going to be punished, and all of this. It was so blatant. It was so blatant. And nobody defended me. I called the ACLU. Nobody was available. In those days, there was no movement. There was nothing. But they said I had to go out. The reason they wanted me out immediately, they said, as I was infecting the other girls. And I thought, my God, am I? I'm sure. Oh, so that was a life-changing experience, and in a very, very big way. And I'll tell you about the music in a minute, but just for information, in a very big way, because when those kids picked me up to go to that, it turned out there were 14 kids, college students walking around. 14, that's all there was. So guess what? First, my parents discover I've written a letter to the New York Times, because somebody calls them and says, is this your daughter? And they'll say, what? We didn't know about this, right? So now my face is on the front page of the New York Times, marching around the school, the White House. So you can imagine how Smith College felt about that. But my parents collapsed emotionally. They wanted to hide me. They didn't want the neighbors to know that I wasn't in school anymore. It was all that stuff. Had no support. There was, as I said, there was no movement. And I felt really shattered, and I became kind of depressed. that you go out there and there's no real support anywhere. But I lived through it. And when those kids picked me up and took me to Washington in their car, these people I didn't know, as we started to leave the school, I had my hand on the door. Was I going to jump or was I going to go? Because they had already warned me they were going to ruin my life.
Yeah.
And my parents didn't have resources. We were poor people, but I went. And that is ultimately what it's all about. You have fear. You know there are going to be terrible consequences, and you do it anyway because you're passionate and you're caring. And it really is about empathy for the suffering of people. At that time, I hadn't read Marx yet, which I did later, thoroughly. I was the only one I knew who actually read Marx. But it just came out of pure human empathy. And it's amazing how we blind ourselves, how we don't want to see the suffering that's in our midst. And it's the same thing is happening today, isn't it? So just quickly about the music, yes, I was very weak physically, but I got into a conservatory because I had talent. But I wasn't physically able to do much. And then when I got rheumatic fever at 15, I couldn't play anymore. I tried for years. I could not play. If I played the piano, I would become so spasmed that I couldn't lift a fork and eat. So it was hopeless. But I did later on discover, computers where you could start playing music without playing an instrument. And when I was 73, when I had a spiritual awakening, when I was 35, I started hearing voices, and God told me what to do, that I should go back, get a piano and only improvise, and I would be able to play again. And I did. But that takes us far afield. But since you had mentioned that, I thought I would tell you.
Yeah. Given what you've been through in your life and looking back, like especially around the 60s, when there was kind of in the 60s an uprising of sort. I mean, you had a movement coalesce that was ultimately suppressed. No big surprise there. But looking back then and looking now, what do you see? Do you see that things have improved, or have they gotten worse, or would you say that they've stayed the same?
Well, there have been some things that have improved. When I was a part of the anti-war movement, I was in the anti-apartheid movement, I was in the community organizing movement, I was in the women's movement, because I did in the 60s and the 70s. I didn't stop until I had this spiritual awakening. But what I saw was that there weren't as many people engaged as there are now, that things were worse in terms of, for instance, I, as a woman, I was the only one in this whole, in these, most of these organizations who really thought about any of this, who had studied any of it. And yet they relegated me to getting the coffee, wouldn't let me speak. The only women who were allowed to speak were the girlfriends of the dudes. Everybody was taking drugs, which I refused to do because I knew that was a one-way ticket to go to jail. If you're serious about the revolution, you don't come in high. And I worked in factories. I've worked, I know what the working class life is like. And so the movement, it was very misogynistic. Our society is very misogynistic, but the movement was misogynistic. Women had no voice. We were going through a lot of turmoil where Black people were trying to find their power, but they did it often did it in a way that was so anti-socialist. Like I spoke at some conferences and talked about how you can't give power to Blacks by disenfranchising white workers. That is not going to work. You might get the white liberals to back you up. In fact, I was at the Conference for New Politics. I worked there. I worked for the movement. I worked for the National Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy. I worked for a number of organizations as a clerical worker. I mean, women didn't have any, if you weren't a fundraiser, you were, the secretary. But anyway, And there was a lot of naivete. And so the white liberals said, yeah, let's give the blacks, 51% of the vote. And then they left. And then half the people you knew were police agents.
Yeah.
And, I was in, I was in Cleveland. I was working in a working class collective and I was part of a movement of independent truckers, and we were trying to help the women to get welfare and so on to help support the strike. And so, I was doing all of that. And then one day I went in there and we were so close. And one day I went in there and they said, Beth, we are so sorry, but we've been told, came down, you're a socialist and we can't work with you anymore. They didn't care that I was a socialist the day before.
Right.
So if you think the anti-socialism is bad now, and they were like in tears because I was helping and we were close. But there was a lot of anti-communism and a lot of ignorance. So, it was exciting to see the movement, but the movement was very unconscious. It was a lot of kids who were rebelling against their parents, and God bless them. I'm not saying that they were bad. I understand, the sexual revolution and all of that. I loved the fact that there was finally a women's movement, although some of it was not, my style. But you'll love this story. After working for many years, I went back to college and I finished up, and we had an event. We were doing a strike, and it was for open admissions. And some of the black students came in and said, no, we want preferential admissions. And I said, no, everybody needs to be able to get into school. That is the whole point. Otherwise, you're fragmenting. Well, see, that was another instance where I was completely out of it. Well, these guys threatened my life in public. In public, they said, we'll take care of you later. And we went back to the SDS meeting. The SDS meeting gave up completely on open admissions. They were just too scared. They wouldn't walk with me, and they wouldn't let me participate or use the mimeograph machine. So I did my own thing, found a way to get around it. But my experiences in the 60s were not great. Were not positive. I feel there was not a level of consciousness. And today, as terrible as things are, more different kinds of people are coming together. I thought Bernie was going to win the Democrat, but he didn't, of course. But more different kinds of people are coming together. There is more maturity. There is more older people. And there are more people who are seeing the flaws, but still, you mentioned socialism. I mean, I'm not a socialist like the Soviet Union.
Right.
Right. It's like from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. That's communism. That is also a potluck. I call it, Sean, the potluck revolution. It's just what you were saying. So you go into the hearts of people. It's natural. It's normal for people to come together, raise a barn, but we've commodified everything. I completely agree with that. So, it's the best of all time. It's the worst of all times.
Yeah. A good friend of mine, Warren Ellis, who's watching right now, said, has always said, the problem that we face right now is that we don't have the numbers yet. We don't have enough people mobilized.
Yeah.
And what would you say is key to changing that, to mobilizing the populace? And I know that it's hard because even there's that stigma about socialism.
Yeah.
Anytime that you mention anything, of course now the right wing and even some Democrats will accuse you of being a socialist if you say anything like, universal health care or anything of that such.
Right. Well, look what they're doing to Mamdani.
Oh, I know.
It's absolutely appalling. You look at that and then I kind of lose hope. What I feel we need is consciousness more. I mean, of course we need to mobilize, but what we need is to shift consciousness. That to me is the big thing. And by the way, there is something that I would like to add in. I don't know what's the right time. So, because I want to answer your question, but I want to come back to the question of women, because you didn't have women in your dissertation. And I think you're missing a big piece that really comes right out of Marx also, which is, what is the value of labor power? Is what does it take to reproduce the working class? And has traditionally been the jobs of the unpaid job of women, not only the children, but also to put the men together when they came home from work and to work a second job. And the fact that women didn't have money of our own was the source of that weakness. But if you think about this, and then I do want to get back to your original question, that is all about taking care of people and the earth, is housework. That's what housework is. We have never been brought up to value housework. Childcare is underpaid. Nursing is underpaid. All of these things, and just being a woman who's raising children was unpaid. And the lack of value for housework is exactly the same lack of value for the planet, for the earth. We don't nurture the earth. We just exploit it, as you were talking about. I completely agree with what you're saying, but that has been traditionally the role of women. And you see, it still has no value. The only thing that matters is what is paid, is money. So going back, am I going on too long?
No, this is fascinating.
Oh, okay. So now coming back to the whole issue of why do I think we need a consciousness, and not that I don't agree that we need numbers, is that we've been brainwashed. We have been brainwashed. You were alluding to this too. We think that capitalism has always existed, will always exist, must always exist, is the best thing since sliced bread. Well, actually, sliced white bread is a terrible thing. But anyway,
That's true.
So Sean, we have been brainwashed, and we have been brainwashed into thinking this is natural, and we're brainwashed. And here comes the part about ego. From the moment we're born, we have an instinct for self-preservation.
Right.
And that's what I consider the ego. The ego, in my definition, is about awareness of the individual existence. And so the baby is going to cry. The baby doesn't say, oh, mom has been up for 24 hours straight. I think I'll go hungry for a while and let her take a rest. And then she'll be happy to see me. The baby doesn't give a darn. The baby goes, wah! I want. See, this is infantile. This is our infantile consciousness that we are born, very understandably.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're in a situation, let's say we have a family. I am competing with my brothers and sisters for the resources of the family, the emotional resources, the material resources. And, I figure out how to manipulate mommy. Mommy is manipulated by guilt. I'm going to make her feel guilty. That's my personality. I get into guilt tripping, or I'm going to intimidate, or I'm going to flatter dad and say whoever is going to give me what I want, I'm going to manipulate them to get what I need. That is the ego. It's very understandable. Then you take that same ego and you put it in school. And what is the first thing you're doing? You're competing.
Yeah.
You're competing in sports. I'm horrified. What? Sports have to be competitive? Why? It's not just the economic system in the obvious sense. It's everything. We're competing in sports. We compete for grades. We compete for getting into the best school. We compete, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we are trained and brainwashed into believing that this is normal, natural, and the way it has to be. And we can change that. I ran a program for a while called Unleashing the Power of Kids. And we talked about critical thinking for kids, service for kids, and non competitive games. And that's what we did every time we had kids come together and the parents stopped bringing the kids.
They
The,
stopped.
the parents stopped bringing the kids. The kids loved it. The kids were cleaning. The kids were doing service. The kids really felt valued, like they had value because of their contribution was great. And we taught critical thinking. And as I said, we did non-competitive sports. They loved it. But it really fell apart from a lack of support from the adults who just, couldn't be bothered because why? Because they didn't believe in it either. They were brainwashed too. So we have an instinctive ego, and then it keeps getting fed. When you learn in your family how to manipulate or to dominate or how to compete in order to get your needs met. And then you have it from the moment you enter school, and it goes on and on and on, and it never ends. We're always competing for resources.
Yeah.
And so until people recognize this is trained, we are brainwashed in our families, and it's socially, it's tradition, it's the way things are done. Why do women still allow their daughters to undergo female genital mutilation? How could that happen? They should know better. But it's like, well, then they're going to get the best husbands, or they're going, we don't think. People do not think. People just merge with the consciousness of the system, of the people around them, their family, their friends. And we need an inner revolution based on oneness, accountability, and mutual support.
Yes.
I have a whole program called Living with Reality. There are actually 9 platforms, but these are the simple ones. I've got a book called, it's all free. I put it all free on my Healing Arts Network website, about the handbook for the inner revolution. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say healingartsnetwork.org is where you can go to download those books.
That's right.
Healingartsnetwork.org.
Thank you. And not only that, but you can also listen to all my music free. I've also done piano music that helped to reverse my husband's cognitive impairment for a while. I don't know how, but I just intuit everything. Because see, this, the other part of my story is when I became spiritual, when I had been a Marxist up to that point. But I think Marx is very spiritual. He just didn't know it. Unfortunately, he was anti-Semitic, but we have to overlook things.
Unfortunately, it's a lot to overlook.
There's a lot to overlook. Yeah, exactly. So we need an inner revolution, and we need to fight for that. We need to stop believing the lies. We need to stand up to all the racism and all the misogyny, and say we are all better off when everybody is well. Do you really want an undocumented person sitting on a bus coughing on you because they can't get medical care? It's so terrible that a poor person who, by the way, is picking your food with that same cough, right? It's so terrible that the people who are slaving away for the capitalist system are going to get health care.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much inhumanity and cruelty to the system. And I think that everybody feels that intrinsically,
Yes.
but they don't always acknowledge the source, the root of it.
Yes.
They blame themselves, or because again, we've been brainwashed to do that. If you're not succeeding, if you're not rich, well, that's because you're not working hard enough. You're not trying hard enough. You're not motivated enough. All of this stuff. So yeah, it becomes this perpetuating cycle. of blame, and a lot of that is directed toward yourself. Why am I? And again, that goes back to that competitive nature. Why am I not as successful as my neighbor?
Yes.
Right? And so you resent your neighbor
Yes.
now because you're
Yes.
right. So
Yes.
it's a vicious cycle. How do we overcome that, do you think?
Well, you know, I believe in telling the truth. I just tell it like I see it, and just tell the truth. Talk to people, tell people, for instance, people who are in the resistance, the anti-Trump resistance, I tell them it's not enough.
Oh, right. Absolutely.
You know, we need a positive vision. Here's one sentence. The purpose of the economy and the society is to meet the needs of people and the earth. There is no other purpose for society or for the economy. It's just like you were talking about, you know, in our early history, we knew that. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, and we forgot that.
Yeah, we forgot. And start talking about it. So yes, yeah, let's protest this and let's protest that. But let's look at how this came about. We don't want to go back to how it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. As you were pointing out, this income inequality, it's endemic to the capitalist system. They have to get the profit from somebody, and it's you. You know, and I'm not against all free enterprise. I think we need creativity. We need people coming up with great ideas. But we don't need a system which is based on accumulating capital at the expense of people's needs. We don't need that. I agree with all the things. In fact, I've got something called the New Declaration of Independence. And
Oh,
it's,
okay.
yeah, you would love it, I think, because it really covers so many of the things that you're talking about. And does not have a lot of signatures, but it's on change.org. And you should have gotten it in your media kit. So I have a nonprofit spiritual organization called the stream.info. That's another website. I've got lots of websites. And the stream.info, and there is right on there, there is the New Declaration of Independence. And it says, because see, God said to me one day, you got to write a new Declaration of Independence. I said, okay, that means I have to read the damn thing. So I went back and I read it and I said, this is really cool. So if you have a government that's getting in the way of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you have a right to abolish it. Well, that's what we're talking about. Abolishing, that is American, abolishing the government and the system that's, you know, that it supports, and replace it with something else. Oh boy, what is that? What can we do? And so, you know, it could be filled out, but I talk about cooperatives and getting money out of politics and all that as the vision of where we're going. And I brought that to so many of the people in the movement that they don't even want to see it. They didn't. I brought it to them months ago when all this was starting, and I said, you know, it's not that I'm that smart. It's just things are kind of obvious. We need a positive vision. It's like, oh no, it's not going to be that bad, or oh no, we have to put our time into, you know, standing there and, you know, rebelling and resisting. It's like, it's not enough, because this goes back to your question of how are we going to engage more people. What I am saying, people who think they're Republicans and voted for Trump agree with.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Right? So we start, if I knew how to plug into an organization where I could be useful, because I'm still chronically ill, and now I'm 80 and chronically ill. But, you know, I'm trying to get on some podcasts. I'm trying to get out and speak. YouTube will never let me promote my videos ever.
Yeah, I hear you on that.
You know, right? Because we're saying the wrong things. I even have permission to do election advertising, and they still stop me every single time. I don't know why, but anyway, I try to sneak it in by playing music and sticking something in between. But I think what we need to do is get our heads on straight and say, this is what we're for. This is what we're fighting for, not to be afraid of the words. You can call it the potluck revolution, and saying that's really what social. Don't you agree? Isn't that exactly the potluck? You go to the potluck, you bring what you can, and you take what you need. That's America. And start having groups of people everywhere who are actually putting forward this idea. Put forward the new Declaration of Independence if it's useful. If it's not useful, don't use it. I don't care. I'm not planning on getting to be famous. I'm just trying to stay alive for a little while longer. And, I would love to speak. I would love to go talk to young people. I've seen them. I've seen that they agree with what I say and then they freeze. But it's like yoga. There was a time when yoga was like, oh my God, yoga, and now it's like there's a yoga studio on every corner. It seeps into the consciousness. It seeps into, so we need an inner revolution. We need to teach that. We need to help people understand that what we need is to go back to basics of caring for one another, of understanding that we're only God gave me an aphorism once, which is, I wrote a book called God's Little Aphorisms. And it was, you cannot clean the air over one house in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
That we need to understand that we're only as well as the sickest of us. And I believe that CEOs and management, because I did work in the real world a lot in my life before I started my own counseling practice, they are miserable.
Yeah, the science actually backs that up. The more income that you have, studies have shown that the lower levels of empathy and joy. They're not happy.
Because they're all caught up in competing.
Yeah.
And that's a lonely place. The human soul was not meant for this. We were meant to be together and to support. We need a little alone time sometimes, but basically we are one. We feel each other's pain. I had some clients who were born in India, and I asked them, how could you stand walking out of your door when you lived in a village, when people are on the street begging? How could you stand it? They turned off. They couldn't live with it.
Well, it's the same way with people here, the way that we kind of look at the homeless.
Exactly.
Invisible.
Exactly. We don't want to see it. I don't want to see it.
Yeah.
I wrote a song once that starts with, homeless people don't feel cold. Not in their cardboard cities. They're not like me.
Yeah.
But I don't know what to do about it. I don't want to give up my home. I don't want to see, and that's the way it's always positive. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to have to give something up. No, I'm going to have to get something. I'm going to get love. I'm going to get connected. And maybe I'm actually going to get what I need.
Yeah. Yeah. Mutual aid is another example.
Perfect.
And I highly encourage people to look into mutual aid networks near you. I think that you can go to mutualaid.org or something like that. Google it, because it's a very important part of building that community and raising consciousness together, because you're helping people and you're getting something in exchange. It's a very interesting concept that has worked quite well.
Wow. So I call that mutual support.
Yeah.
And what that means is, I do what I can do best. You do what you can do best. And we're not dominated by how much does this pay? Oh, I really want to be a carpenter, but my father wants me to be an accountant. And okay, sure, I'll become an accountant. Then I'll commit suicide at 25, right?
Yeah.
Because people all over are doing what they're not suited for. A lot of men are suited for raising children. They're wonderful. They're nurturing. Some of us are not. That would be me, Well,
let me ask you this. Why is the ego then so difficult to transcend even despite its destructive potential.
Well, that's because the ego is associated with the survival instinct. And the survival instinct is strong. And you live in a society which is already, life is a struggle. It's all that's in the introduction of my book, Living with Reality, which is 688 pages. But people have used it to study and to shift consciousness. It's a way of shifting your consciousness. It's much longer than the handbook for the inner revolution is 99 pages or something that you can read. But see, it's because it's associated with survival. It's like, it's fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
And then the ego needs to be transformed. So what that means is you start showing the ego, hey, didn't you feel great when you were playing this game and everybody was laughing? How did you feel when you were the last kid on the baseball team and you struck out and you lost the game? How did you feel when your friend did that? You get to reach into people's hearts to talk about what really makes them happy. And people, they're told to consume something, to buy a drink or take a drug or take a pill or something. I'm not saying that some people don't need medication, but we've
commodified depression.
Yeah.
Quite literally. I mean, if you're depressed because of the system, we have a solution. Take this pill, it'll make you feel better, even though it really doesn't. And yeah, there are some people that need antidepressants and so forth. I'm not diminishing that. I'm just saying that the pharmaceutical companies have found a way to commodify illness.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And nobody tells you that you're depressed because of the system. Right. Nobody tells you that you're depressed because you're doing things you don't believe in. Nobody tells you that you're depressed because you feel alienated from other people or because you feel alienated from yourself, the product of your labor. Everything is so distant. And now with AI, they're really trying to get rid of us so they don't even have to keep us around.
Yeah, it's definitely a scary world that we're getting into.
Work less and spread the wealth instead of having why does everybody have to work 40, 60 hours a week? We can have more AI work 30 hours a week, 20 hours a week, whatever, and still make the same production. We should all be happy. That should be a good thing.
Well, I mean, the only problem with that is that AI takes up a huge environmental footprint on the planet.
Yes, but I'm saying even if you're going to use it or use robots or whatever, I hate AI. I can't stand it when I ask a question and AI answers me. Half the time it's wrong anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that now too. Anytime that you Google anything, the first response now is AI generated.
And it's not always accurate. And it doesn't show you all it's just more alienation from the product of our labor.
Well, and again, part of the reason why people are so depressed is because what we're doing is against our human nature.
Exactly. But that's exactly right. Or they're in miserable relationships and they're afraid to leave because they're going to lose their health care benefits.
Yep.
Or, the income. Well, that was the story of women. Forever can't leave an abusive relationship because who's going to support the children?
Yeah, and that unfortunately persists to this day too, to a large extent, which is just unfortunate. I mean, we it's remarkable how little progress we've actually made.
Oh yes.
I mean, it's also.
I mean, there are some things that are better, but some things that aren't. And as you were pointing out, of course, with income inequality, it's stagnant, and the air is worse, and the climate is worse, and the trees are stressed, and there's like this death pall over this planet.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. It's and it's. I mean, global warming is pretty much evident. right?
Oh, God.
I mean, we're seeing evidence of this everywhere, and yet we're doing absolutely nothing about it. It's like,
Going against it now with the new
yeah,
administration. Anything we did do, we're going to undo. Anything good that we've done that's made any progress, they are now eliminating.
yeah, yeah. I know. I mean, this big beautiful bill is murder.
Yeah, it is murder.
I mean, there's just no other way to put it. And you know, it's frustrating because you don't. I mean, we talked about how the media is completely bought by the same conglomerations that are brainwashing us, and you know, they'll talk about something like the big beautiful bill, and they'll say, well, you know, it's going to cut Medicare, but they never ever address the root cause of the problem, which is the system, because they depend on that system.
They're part of it.
Yeah.
They don't see it as a system. They see it as the way it is.
Yeah. Let me ask you something related. Can ego have a positive role to play?
Okay, very good question. So ego is natural. It's born when we are born, because when you're in your mother's womb, you're not feeling like you're a separate individual. Your needs are getting met and all of that. It's socialism. But anyway, but once you're in the rest of the world, you know, it comes up. And what I say is the ego needs to be twice born, first as a no, and now second as a yes. Yes to working together, yes to cooperation. And what my thought is, the purpose of the ego is for you to be aware of yourself as an individual. So you need a sweater, you're hungry, it's like, oh, you should eat, or you know, you're not eating right, you're ruining your health. Your ego should be telling you that you're ruining your health because you're not eating right. It's your awareness of your individual, or it should be telling you you're in the wrong job, or you're in the wrong relationship, or you're thinking the wrong thoughts. The ego has a purpose, but it's dominant. The problem is that it dominates us. We forget the oneness, and we only think about the individual. So that's how I see it. You can't kill the ego, because the ego is a natural part of being an individual. I believe what I call it individuation in the context of oneness. We are one, but we're also we're different. We need to differentiate. I need to look at you and say, I don't agree with what you're saying, you know, and you know, we need to differentiate. But that's not ego. That's recognizing, okay, I am an individual in the context of oneness that isn't merging with everybody and everything that is so toxic that already exists in this world. And so we can say, I've awakened, you know, the spirit needs to awaken, but the ego needs to wake up. This is killing us. We are destroying ourselves physically. People are living less long, and we're destroying each other.
Yeah.
And we're destroying the earth. And the ego, self-preservation, should tell us, wait a minute.
Well, I was just going to mention that. I mean, it's actually going against the ego, because if the ego is about self-preservation, well, we're failing miserably at that, because
We are.
we're literally committing suicide on a global scale.
We are. But see, the ego in itself doesn't have that consciousness. The ego has short-term thinking, me-based. It's a me-based consciousness. So it believes that I have to get ahead of you. And that is one of the worst things about our world and our society, is how much the thirst for power dominates everything. In a relationship, a man and a woman are fighting for power against each other and don't even realize it. There's so much, you know, climb the ladder, get more power. Money is power.
Yep.
This is power. That's power. That's the way the ego sees things. I need power, because otherwise they who have power are going to destroy me. When you're born in this world, you're not educated. The ego needs to be educated, like a child. You don't let a child just run around rampant and never get educated. The ego has an infantile consciousness that needs to be taught. Oh, isn't this better? Isn't this better when we work together? I loved what you said about, all the important um, realizations we've had have been collective. People don't do things by themselves. I love it when people say, "Oh, I'm an individual." I say, "Oh, really? You grow your own food, you weave your own clothing, you grow your own cotton, and you pave the road on which you walk." There are no individuals. We don't exist individually. We exist in a social, societal context.
Yeah, no. So this might be an odd question, but what steps can we take without leaving society completely to sort of break away from this negative societal conditioning that we're experiencing?
Oh, that's such a good question. We can't break away. There's nowhere to go. But I think we have to train our minds to approach every question in a different way. And I should tell you about my spiritual awakening at some point. But for instance, in my Living with Reality book, I say, how do we make a decision? What I believe we should do is ask the question, is it for the highest good of all, including me, for us to buy that house, or for us to go out to dinner, or to paint those walls green? Is it for that? Just all of a sudden, you're positing your mind in a completely different way. Is it for the highest good of all, including me? We can't be into sacrificing ourselves because we are part of the oneness.
Right.
And that was me in the political movement. I would have killed myself to end the Vietnam War, except that I'm afraid of pain. But anyway, but I've had plenty of it. But I mean, I thought, oh yeah, it's okay for me to sacrifice. I realize now that I am part of the oneness. And if I am not well, I can't function. And I need to take care of myself. But what does taking care of myself mean? What do I really need? And what is for my highest good? And so that question in a marriage, in a group, every group that I run, we ask that question, is it for the highest good of all, including me, to make this decision or to do that? I don't hear that typically in the world, but see, you can start doing that. You can ask yourself, but then it really helps to develop your intuition. And that, maybe brings us to my spiritual awakening. But in every relationship, in every group, if people ask themselves, it is for the highest good of all. And what I've discovered after many, many years of experience is we always get the same answer, unless there's something that hasn't been cleared. If we all clear, we all get the same answer. But if we have hidden agendas, or we're not being forthright about something, or we have a fear and we haven't dealt with it, then we're going to get a jumble of different answers. So I have a section in my book which actually explains to you how to use this tool, so it doesn't sound completely daunting. And so that's one way right off the bat. And another thing that I think is important is I was given this idea that we should live in the present, be informed by the past, but be guided by the future.
I love that.
And then you just feel it. What is the future calling for?
Yeah.
That is not the way we live our lives. There's so many ways, Sean, if you looked at my book, I have a whole section on making amends. And most people think, you say, oh, I'm sorry. And they think that's it. That's an amend. And it isn't. when you make an amends, first you have to have compassion for yourself for whatever you did.
Right.
And so you have to understand why you did it. Self-awareness, self-awareness, self-awareness. And so then when you have compassion for yourself and you understand why you did it, you say, I realize now that I did this. And you say what you did. You don't just brush it off by saying, gee, I'm sorry, right? You say what you did and how that hurt you is, and that you acknowledge how it hurt the other person. It's wrenching. And then you ask the other person, is there any other way that I hurt you? And when you're done with that, then you say, even though I couldn't have done any better at the time, I need to ask you to forgive me. Will you forgive me? And people do, usually. And if they don't, it's their problem. That's how you see these spiritual tools change the way you are in your life, moment by moment. And you start living from a different paradigm. And that's how things change.
Yeah, well, we definitely need a new paradigm. There's no question about that. So I want to ask you about your spiritual awakening. Can you kind of go into more details about that?
Yes, please. Well, I think that I had some kind of spirituality when I was a child, but I was brought up in the Jewish religion, which was where they said, thank God I wasn't made a woman, and it was. Do you know that in the Saturday service? Yeah, they say, yeah, thank God you didn't make me a woman. And in the Jewish religion, in the conservative, the Orthodox, not the Reformed, we weren't Reformed, the typical Jewish religion, it was, not very spiritual, if you ask me. There is a lot of rote, there is a lot of, you have to eat this way, you have to do this, and it was all God-centered, and God is wonderful, and I couldn't see that. I'd never thought God was wonderful, and I couldn't figure out that whole thing at all. And I remember at a young age, I said, well, if this is the way God made us, and something's wrong with God. I said, if there is a God, I would hate that God. And so I just became an atheist and a Marxist and all of that. But I also felt a certain emptiness because nobody was taking care of us spiritually and emotionally. Nobody cared. That wasn't even part of the conversation. We were like little robots fighting for the revolution, and it was pretty empty, and relationships were terrible, and we were fighting with each other, and it wasn't good. I was pretty burnt out. So I had a horrible experience at the end of my political career, which I'm not going to go into, but it was pretty bad. And so I was lost. And I met a guy who was a practicing alcoholic and drug addict, but a very spiritual practicing alcoholic and drug. He couldn't understand a word he said. He was always high, but he just kind of looked at me, and he said, we're going to get married. I mean, he must have known something. We did actually eventually get married. But I tried to get him to stop drinking. And so I called AA, and they said, go to Al-Anon. And I went to Al-Anon, which was for the families of alcoholics. And I thought they were going to tell me how to get my boyfriend at that time to stop drinking. Well, they didn't do anything of the sort. It was a self-help program, evolutionary spiritual program. But I walked into the room, and this is really amazing. When you think about it, I walked into the room and I looked at the women. They were all women at that time because the men weren't staying with their alcoholic wives. And there were very few women in AA at that point. I looked at them and I said, they have something I don't have. They have a serenity that I don't have. And I hated to admit that. I hated to admit it, but it was true. And that moment, I had a spiritual awakening, that I began to realize that there was another dimension of me that was starving. And it didn't have any name to it. There was no religion. There's no dogma, none of that nonsense, which makes religion so damaging to people. so awful, so about social control instead of about spiritual liberation. And so I started to like hear this voice in my head talking to me, and I thought everybody did. So I just didn't think anything of it. Well, my health was so bad that at the age of 35, I went to a holistic chiropractor. He said I was the weakest human being he'd ever met in his life.
Wow.
And there was something called applied kinesiology. You may not know what it is. It's like they muscle test you. They go like this. And if it's weak, that means no. If it's strong, it means yes. Anyway, I could not be muscle tested. They couldn't. I could not hold a muscle. And so after working with me, he was a holistic chiropractor. He was a good guy. He said, I give up. I'm going to send you to a metaphysical counselor. I didn't know what a metaphysical counselor was. And I walked in, sweet woman. She turns on a green light, and suddenly I could be muscle tested. It was weak. It wasn't a lot, but something changed in my body. I got stronger. And then she started telling me about past lives, which I thought was complete hogwash. And then I said to her, this has just happened. I just opened my mouth and I said, that isn't the way it happened. This is the way it happened. Now, where did that come from, right? This is just because she's turned on a green light. And she said, oh my God, you're right. That is the way. Anyway, that day I went home and I called my Al-Anon sponsor. And I told her what happened. And she said, oh, can you do that for me? And so she came to my house and I had my first session as a counselor. I started reading past lives. Now, I want to tell you something. I don't do that much of that kind of metaphysical stuff anymore. I started having guides. They talked to me. I had miraculous experiences where my guides would say, don't read anything. Don't study with anybody. Be a blank slate for me to write on. That was what God said. Just be completely, don't study. Don't have ideas in your head. And so I said, okay, I'll do that. And then they said, okay, go to this library you've never been to. Walk across to that shelf over there where you didn't know anything. Pick up this book. I put my hand out, open the book, and it said Brotherhood. And I put it back, and but just before they sent me on this wild goose, they said, call me brother. I mean, how do you explain that? How do you explain the fact that I was told, I had a client coming who had a bladder infection, and there's something called the materia medica for homeopathy, which I knew nothing about. And they said, my guide said, you're going to help her. I want you to get the materia medica. It was a Sunday in the middle of this town. I said, where am I going to get it from? They said, don't worry. They told me to go to a building. They picked it out of the phone book. They said, go to this building. And I get there, and believe it or not, it's a chiropractic college, but it's been closed. There are padlocks everywhere. There is nobody there. And my guide, who doesn't exist, by the way, and I'll explain that in a minute, before your people hang up, I'm going to tell you, this is really odd. They said, keep knocking at that door. I knocked and knocked and knocked at this door of this padlocked building, and a guy comes shuffling out. Finally, he looks like he's the janitor. And I said, do you have the materia medica? KH told me to come here. Do you have the materia medica? And he said, what's that? I said, it's a book. And he said, there's nothing here. There's no books. It's empty. This place is closed. He said, but there's a card for somebody who was here. Maybe she will know. He hands me the card. I call up this phone number because there's no cell phones in those days. I call up this cell phone, this number, and I tell her this whole story. And I said, KH told me that I was going to get, can you help me? And she said, well, if this is a scam and you're trying to rob me, it is the wildest story I've ever heard. Yes, I have the materia medica. Come right on over and you can borrow the book.
Wow.
And when I got home and my client got there, it was like, open the book, close your eyes, put your finger down. And I found her a remedy for a bladder infection.
Wow.
This is true. I know that people might not believe me, but trust me, I do not lie. I don't lie. This all of these things I was told. I picked up a newspaper. They said, you're going to buy this house. And I said, I can't buy this house. I told my realtor, you have to take me to because my guide said that I'm going to buy this house. She said, there's no way, you can't qualify for that house. It's 50% more than you can qualify for. I said, okay. Then I heard it again. You're going to buy this house and you're going to tell your real estate agent that KH told you you're going to buy this house. So I go, try it again. Turns out they never looked at my tax returns. It was owned by a company that had, it was a construction company. They had taken it in trade. They didn't care. They looked at my credit. And within a few weeks, I was in that house. They let me go in and I had a big celebration on the floor because I had no money. So we were all on the floor eating off a sheet with my huge dogs walking over the sheets. That was the craziness. Just like I was crazy when I was an activist, I never cared. I got arrested many times. I was yanked around by the handcuffs, and then they accused me of assaulting an officer.
Yeah.
Right? That kind of stuff, not complete nonsense. And then I bought this house, and now I borrowed every penny of this house to buy it. Every penny I borrowed. And then that night when we had this big event, my guide said to me, we're leaving now. I said, you saddled me with this mortgage and I owe the down payment and everything. I don't know anything. He said, it's time for you to own what you know. And they said, we're leaving. So I had these kind of experiences, but every once in a while they would come back. And I said to them, first of all, are there past lives? And you love this. The inner voice said to me, what do you care? Is this working therapeutically? If it is, do it. If it doesn't, get rid of it. He said, you don't even know if there's a current life. How do you know whether or not there's a past life? I said, well, okay, do you exist? And they said, what do you care? Is this helping? Are you getting wisdom and knowledge? Then do it. If not, throw it out. It's one of my beliefs, where all beliefs are created by the mind. It's all nonsense. We should not hang on to our beliefs, that we should hold on to our beliefs and use a belief. If it's helpful, use it. If it isn't helpful, don't. Sometimes I use the word God. Sometimes I use the source. Sometimes I use the universe. Sometimes I don't do anything. And then I'm told to do a talk that was being recorded. I didn't even know what the topic was. So I said, okay, and today I'm going to talk about God. This was, I think, 1985. And then it said, God is not perfect. God is evolving. And that's why things look the way they are. God isn't perfect. You're not perfect. Nothing is perfect. It's through its faults that the earth evolves. It's all about evolution. And so a lot of our beliefs and what we think at one time in our lives, we're going to grow up and a little bit, and then we'll have a different thought. But not to hang on to that either, because if we were to live another 1,000 years, we'd realize that was all nonsense too.
Yeah.
Beliefs are just beliefs. They're not reality.
How did your spiritual awakening change your perspective on social activism?
That's great. But see, remember, I was burnt out and I was done with politics. And I went inside and I cultivated the inner voice. And when I say I cultivated it, in my early months of training by upstairs, whatever it was that was training me, that I don't know what it really was, it would say, eat this, don't eat that, get in the car, drive left, and just be listening all the time. And that's what I did. I listened. I called it living at the intersection of the human and the divine. And I listened all the time. And I was trained to constantly hear the inner voice. More people need to hear their inner voice. And by their inner voice, I don't mean your ego. And I don't mean your opinions. I mean that connection to the universe, and so everything changed. And I was told to stay out of it. I was told to teach my spiritual principles and teach the healing of God, that we are healing God. God isn't healing us because we are part of the God that is evolving. All these very unpopular ideas, people left me in droves. Half my clientele left when I talked about that. But, it's the same thing as sitting in the car thinking I'm going to Washington to a demonstration. You have to have courage to actually, and I'm not popular. And I don't believe that we create reality. I think that's nonsense. We co-create reality in a subtle dance of intention and allowance. And I've got it all broken down. It's the law of co-creation. Everything is co-creation. So anyway, it changed everything about me. And so I would hear, okay, there is a battle going on this planet between sexuality and violence, between connection and separation. Separation is out of balance with connection. Stay out of it. Stay out of the battle. I said, okay, I stayed out of it. Then one day I heard there's a battle going on this planet between separation and connection. Get into it. So I got back into spiritual activism. I believe we need to be activists. We need to live in this world. We need to manifest a different consciousness in this world, and we may not make it.
Yeah.
I don't know what the universe's intentions. I often feel that if the human race were obliterated, the whole world would be better off.
I've thought that myself.
Have you?
Same thought. Yeah. Just because of what we're doing to the planet.
Yes.
And ourselves, which we either don't understand that we're doing it to ourselves, or we don't care. I think that a lot of people like, yeah, but I'll be dead by then. Someone else's problem.
Yeah, but it's caught up with us.
Yeah, big time.
That's the beauty of climate change. Climate change teaches us that we are one. They're dying of the heat in Barcelona. You can't sit there and say, oh, I'm going to escape to Europe. It's so much better there. Yeah. And they don't have air conditioning. There's no escape. There's no escape.
Well, the rich think they have an escape, but they really don't.
They really don't, because what they love is also being destroyed.
Right.
And that's the beauty of climate change. It tells us that we're in this together.
So that brings me to an interesting question too. How can we effectively foster collective inner revolution on a societal scale?
On a what scale?
Societal scale.
Oh, a societal scale. Oh, I'm hoping you're going to tell me.
Oh.
I'm out here and I'm speaking. And if you know somebody else who would want to interview me, let them know. Take the, suggest people go to my website, read my books, start having study groups, talking about it. Just take the easiest thing is the new Declaration of Independence, but it is not so much. But I think I even mentioned oneness, accountability, and mutual support. And I talk about what we're doing. That is a tool. I wish I knew how to get more people to listen. I wish I did, but you know how things change. Hegel talked about this, and I know that, you've read Marx, so you know about Hegel. And he talked about, if I'm not mistaken, how you boil water, and it's quantity to quality.
Right.
Right? And so that's what we do. If there's going to be a shift in consciousness on the planet, that shift is going to happen, but you've got to keep the heat on, keep talking about it, keep always bringing people back to what they don't want to hear, because most people don't want to hear my message. They either like the spiritual part and they don't want to hear the political part, or they like the political part and they don't want to hear the spiritual part. But it's not spirituality and reality. It's all one. I mean, what is this? It's just different levels of awareness. We have different I'm hoping that we start to expand our level of awareness. You know, when you stand outside at night and look at the stars, you know what you feel.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that feeling. It's awe. And you know, in that moment, there's something bigger than you.
Yeah. And that goes back to our hunter-gatherer days.
Yes.
That feeling that we get from nature, the feeling that we get from looking up at the stars or sitting around a fire and communing with people. And you know, kind of going off topic a little bit, but that's another problem that we kind of have, is that we're not only now we're being separated even in person. Everything's social media now or an app. We're not communing together anymore. I mean, even with family and friends, it's like, you know, go to any restaurant and look at people, and what are they doing? They're on their smartphones.
I know couples are sitting there, but
Yeah.
you know, in the old days, couples sat there and they didn't look at their apps. They just didn't talk. You know, there's so much more awareness, Sean, than there was back in the day, 60 some odd years ago when I was first, you know, trying to make the good fight. And I hope it doesn't sound like I'm bragging or anything. I'm not.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay, good. So it's about, you know, just having even a slight amount of awareness. You see these things. I would love to have more. You know, I hope that, you know, I expand in my own consciousness. But there's more people who have studied psychology, who have some understanding of how people are. There's more people who are studying spirituality. There's more people who are realizing the damage of all this alienation from nature. There's things called forest therapy. Forest therapy, but I believe that, you know, I want to move somewhere where there's more chi. You know what chi is? Okay. I need chi. That's what keeps me alive. If I don't have chi, I'm just like, I have no energy at all. I was, some healer told me once that I was born with a defective battery. Nobody has been able to fix me yet. And so, you know, he said, you're working on two cylinders, Beth, and it's tough. You know, it's hard to keep going. But you know, the excitement that you have when you connect to people know what that's like, but they're drinking and they're not even connecting. They're lost in their own sickness and they're going after the wrong goals. But there's so much more awareness at the same time as things are so terrible. I don't know how the story is going to end, but let's tap into that awareness. So, for instance, how do we, you know, build a new consciousness? Is talk to everybody and talk about things that they will understand. They may not say, okay, I'm voting for you, or they may look at the declaration. Some people will sign and some people won't. But it doesn't matter. You see, I'm not going to make an external number be what my life is about. I was taught measure nothing, never go, and don't ever think about striving to reach a goal. That's always external. That we grow from the inside. We stretch. We don't go for goals. We stretch. How can I stretch? Help people to stretch their thinking, their beliefs, stretch into more critical thinking, stretch into awareness, stretch into hope. Be self-aware. Notice when you're sabotaging yourself. Right. Notice where your own, see, one of the blessings of this book, which I say is free. It took me 9 years to write Living with Reality. I just want people to read it. I want them to use it, it has tools, it has self-awareness tools. Ask yourself questions. Why do I feel that? Right. Why do I believe that? The question should always be why. I have to do this with my, by the way, if you can put up the stream.info next steps, it's a / the stream.info / next steps. That's giving people some next steps in very concrete ways about what they can do. So if you can
Where is that at again? I'm sorry.
Next steps.
Next.
Next steps. Steps as in the next step is.
Okay.
So next steps, the stream.info, you had it, / next.
Oh, here we go. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's great. So if you click on that, the first one's the stream. Except that it's the stream, like in the water or the river.
We'll get it.
Isn't the third the charm?
The third time's the charm. Yes.
The
There we go.
stream.info next week. That's perfect. Click on that. I mean, I've got so many helpful things. For instance, how can we shift our own? If you come to my live stream called Lighting the Way, I talk every week about what's going on the inside, not just what's going on the outside, but what's going on inside of us and what we can do about it, how we can overcome our fear. I mean, so many people are afraid now, you know, and they don't know how to overcome that. How to stop sabotaging ourselves from doing what we really want to do, what's really in our hearts, and so on. And then I have another program. So that's Lighting the Way on my YouTube channel and also on Facebook, but Facebook makes them disappear after a while. YouTube, it stays forever. I've got the live streaming. Most people talk to me on Facebook because that's when I started. Then I also do, my husband and I do a program called Magical Improvs, because everything I do improvisationally, right? I don't plan things. And I have no plan. When I have a client, I just sit and listen. What am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to do? I have trained people to develop their intuition. That is really their connection to themselves and the universe. You don't have to have religious beliefs to believe in these things. Everybody knows they have intuition, but they don't develop it. You're not getting paid for it. I'm getting paid for it, but anyway. And so all of these things, listen to the music. I have music that will help you to become more peaceful. I've just started a new series of mini concerts. They're like 10 minutes on my gorgeous, believe it or not, I have a 9-foot grand piano. Don't ask me how I got it. That's another miracle. My life is full of horrors and miracles. There's nothing in between. It's either just god awful, like being raped at knife point several times and stuff like that, or I have these miraculous experiences. Anyway, so listen to music that uplifts you. Stay calm. Remember, if you get nothing else from this interview, if you're not well, you don't think straight. When you're stressed, you're frantic. We have to be calm. We have to be compassionate towards the people who are doing terrible things. We need to try to understand everybody, and we need to speak, not like, oh, let's compromise blue and red. No, let's go for what we truly need and believe that we have a right to it. In Ego, Instinct, and Evolution, the introduction to my book, at the end it says, we are meant to exist. Each one of us needs to believe this, because so many of us were born in families that honestly didn't want us, didn't have the resources for us, had parents who were mentally ill or distressed or disturbed. We've all been traumatized. Everybody. I know that. I mean, I haven't been counseling for 45 years without learning that. If Adolf Hitler came into my consulting room, I would have compassion for him. You don't get to be like that for nothing. And so we have to heal the healers. We have to teach the teachers. We need to all heal ourselves. Really question everything.
Yeah.
Question everything. Everything you think, everything in the world, everything you are, everything you believe. Question everything. And be open and hopeful be realistic and hopeful at the same time, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's difficult to do that, though.
It is. But without hope, you have no energy.
Yeah.
Because it's the hope that keeps you going. It's like, oh yeah, I just lost my leg, but I'm losing hope. Well, I mean, I've been ill so much and been in pain so much and been broken physically so much and damaged emotionally and spiritually and socially and been incredibly poor and all of that stuff. But when you lose hope, you're not being guided by the future because there isn't any.
Right.
And we do what we can and we let go of the outcome. We just do it because it's in our nature and because it's what makes us as well as we can be in the moment.
Yeah. Beth, I want to thank you so much for joining the program today. This has been a fascinating conversation and it's given me a lot of thought, a lot to think about, and a lot of things to practice. I want to put up your website one more time. You got two of them here.
Yeah, I actually have three, but I have a personal website too called bethgreen.org. That's easy. Beth Green, GREENDOORG. The Healing Arts Network has tons of free stuff, blogs and books and music and everything. And, everything is free. And then the stream.info is about my nonprofit, which is very unprofitable. And the stream.info/next steps is what you can click on to go to, hey, what can you do in these difficult times? And I have so appreciated talking to you, Sean. You're very unusual.
Yes. Well, that's a good thing to some people.
Well, you're unusual because you're grounded in the realities of the political economic system, and yet you're not a hack. Do you know what I mean? You're not narrow. You've not gotten yourself in another rigid belief system, but you're open and you're still in the inquiry about life, and you're still open and how we could live this long and be. You're not as old as I am, I don't think, but
no, but I feel it.
I know.
Actually, I don't. You've got so much more energy than I do.
I will be in bed for the rest of the day. But, I use my energy for what I need to use it for. And it has been such a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, likewise. So hopefully I will have you back.
Oh, I'd love that.
That would be excellent.
Excellent.
Okay, everyone, this has been Coup Save America. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Hi. Okay, are you gone? So thank you.